Noong Desember 23, bumaksak ako sa kama dahil sa sakit. Dinuro ako ang asawa ko at sinigawan, umuwi ka na muna sa bahay ng nanay mo, huwag kang magstay rito para magdala ang malas. Nagpack ako ang gamit at umalis. Noong December 27, nang balikan niya ako, nasyok siya nang makita ako. Ako nga pala si Camille, 38 years old at nagtatrabaho bilang accountant sa isang construction materials company. Almost 10 years na akong kasal at nakikitira sa asawa kong si Slater at sa biyanan ko na si Nanay Pinti. Nakatira kami sa isang bahay na hindi naman masyadong malaki pero hindi rin maliit. Pero feeling ko palaging masikip at nakakasakal hindi dahil sa lack of space, kundi dahil sa bahay na yon. Matagal na akong namumuhay ng sobrang nakingat, nagtitiis, at nag-effort na i-please ang lahat. Lalo na kapag papalapit na ang Pasko. Yung feeling na parang times 100 yung bigat. Taon-taon ganito palagi. Start ng December 20 o 21, halos wala na akong time para umupo mula sa general cleaning ng bahay, paglalaba ng mga kurtina, pagpapakintap ng mga kubiertos, hanggang sa pagbili ng seafood sa palengke, pag-order ng lechon, at pagpe-prepare ng leche flan at ube halaya. Halos sa akin lahat bumabagsak ang trabaho. Ang biyenan ko puro utos lang, at ang asawa ko naman labas-pasok lang. Magtatanong siya out of obligation tapos sasabihin niyang busy siya sa ganito o ganyan. Sinasabi ko na lang sa sarili ko na okay lang na mapagod ng konti ang misis para maging presentable ang bahay at maging cozy ang Nochebuena. Ang difference lang, yung ibang mamisis na appreciate kahit sa isang thank you. Pero sa Pasko, lahat ng ginagawa ko considered as my obligation. Umaga ang December 23 taong yon. Habang nasa palengke ako at namimiling ramga parol at poinsettia, nakaramdam ako ng matinding chills na gumapang sa buong katawan ko. At first, akala ko dahil lang sa amihan breeze at sanay pong pagod galing sa ilang araw na puyatan at maagang pagising. Pero pag-uwi ko sa bahay, sobrang sakit na ang ulo ko, nakblur yung paningin ko at nanghina ang braso at binti ko. Sumandal ako sa kitchen counter, nilagay yung bulaklak sa vase, at pumunta sa kwarto para magpahinga sandali. Pero pagiga ko, biglang nag-shoot up ang laknat ko. Umaapoy ang katawan ko sa init, pero hiyang-hiya ako sa lamig na tagos hanggang buto dahil sa laknat. Nakdri ang malabi ko at sumikip ang dibdib ko na parang may nakadagan na mabigat na bato. Si Slater, pagkakita sa akin na nakahiga sa kama, ay sumimangot at dry na nagtanong, "O anong nangyayari sa'yo ngayon?" Sinubukan kong bumangon at nakiusap na dalhin niya ako sa klinik dahil nahihirapan akong huminga. Nagtsk siya na halatang irritated. Pero dinala pa rin niya ako sa pinakamalapit na health center. Kinuha ang doktor ang temp ko, chinek ang baga ko gamit ang stethoscope, at umiling habang nakatingin sa akin. Halos 39 ang lagnat niya. Matinding pneumonia ito. Strict bed rest ang kailangan, take her meds, at iwasan ang kahit anong physical effort. Halos hindi pa ako nakahinga ng maluwak nang malaman kong hindi ito simpleng trangkaso. Nakita ko na si Slater sa tabi ko na bakas sa mukha ang matinding inis na parabang yung pasyente ay hindi niya asawa, kundi isang unexpected expense na dumating sa kalagitnaan ng holidays. Pag-uwi sa bahay, kinalatkat ko ang ngapa ako papunta sa kwarto, umiikot ang paningin ko at barado ang ngatainga. Sa labas, yung tunok ng walis tingting sa bakuran, ang kalampak ng kaldero, at ang TV na naka-max volume ay nahalo-halo sa isang gulo. Nakumot ako hanggang dibdib at kahit half asleep, malinaw kong narinig ang boses ni Nanay Pinti sa sala, saktong-sakto. At ngayon pa siya nagkasakit. Napakamalas naman natin. Buong taon siyang okay tapos babagsak siya exactly on December 23. Bawat salita niya ay parang matalim na karayom na tumagos sa pinto at bumaon sa dibdib ko. Nanatili akong tahimik, may nakabara sa lalamunan ko. May sakit talaga ako, exhausted, hindi ko ginusto to para sirain ang Pasko nila. After 30 minutes na nakahiga, narinig ko yung ingay-ing maplato sa kusina, followed by Nanay Pinti's mumbling. Ang gulay hindi pa nahihiwa, ang lesyong hindi pa naayos, yung gadeser na katiwangwang. Ewan ko kung hanggang kailan niya balak humilata diyan. Naknit-nit ang ngangipin ko at pinilit kong bumangon gamit ang nga kamay ko para sumuporta. Ang bigat ng ulo ko at unti-unting nakbablur ang paningin ko, pero pinilit ko pa ring tumayo mula sa kama. Naisip ko na at least makakatulong ako ng konti sa kusina para wala silang ekskuse na tawagin akong tamad. Pero pagdampiing makapa ako sa floor, nawalan akong balance. Sobrang lala ang pagkahilo ko, kailangan kong kumapit sa etching kama para hindi ako bumaksak. Saktong dumaan si Slater sa pinto ang kwarto. Nang makita niya akong sumusuray-suray, instead na tulungan ako, sumimangot siya at sinumbatan ako. Tatayo ka lang ba diyan at walang gagawin? Hindi mo man lang magawa yung apat na simpleng bagay. Tiningala ko ang asawa ko at it took me a few seconds para ma-process na sa akin niya sinabi yon. Nautal akong nag-try mag-explain. Sobrang pagod na ako, sabi ang doktor may pneumonia ako. Pero hindi niya ako pinatapos. Pinutol niya ako gamit ang matalim na boses at dismissive na hand gesture. Sa gitna ng holidays tapos makakaganyan ka. Sinong makakatiis sa kamalasang to? Habang everyone is happy preparing for Noche Buena, dito sa bahay may pasyenteng nakahilata sa kama, naparalize ako. Yung nga salita niya hindi lang insensitive, parang sampal yon isang napakasakit na sampal. Dahil galing ito sa taong nakasama ko sa buhay for almost 10 years. Tiningnan ko siya, hoping to see even a glimpse of regret o concern sa mga mata niya. Pero wala. Tumalikot siya at lumabas ang kwarto. Iniwan akong nakatayo dun, sa gitna ang laknat at kahihiyan na nakakasakal. Sa labas, humirit pa ang biyenan ko, isang babaeng nakakasakit sa maliit na bagay. Ang silbi lang ay sirain ang araw ngiba. Ang heavy ang atmosphere sa bahay that day. Bumalik ako sa kama at nakumot hanggang ulo, pero nanginginig pa rin ako. Ang lamig ay hindi lang dahil sa fever chills, kundi dahil sa coldness na lantarang pinakita nila sa harapan ko. At that moment, na-realize ko na the past few months, madalas itago ni Slater ang phone niya o inumaga na ang uwi. Minsan nagpupuyat siya kakataypi ang messages at kapag nakikita niya akong papalapit, agad niyang ilalok ang screen. Kapag tinatanong ko siya, dry siyang sasagot, work stuff too. Ano bang alam mo rito? Dati, biniblame ko yung sarili ko for being paranoid. Pinilit kong intindihin na baka stressed lang siya sa negosyo, na ang lalaki minsan may sariling issues, pero habang nakahiga sa kamang yon nung December 23, listening to the cruel words of my mother-in-law, and seeing my husband's indifference, may kakaibang kutob na lumaki sa loob ko. A good feeling na may mali talaga sa bahay na to, na ang laknat ko ay simula pa lang, at may mas malaking bagyo na nahintay sa akin. Naisip ko na baka nagsasabi lang silang masasakit na salita out of frustration. Naisip ko na kung tatahimik ako, iinom gamot, at magpapahinga, lilipas din ang lahat gayang dati. Pero even now, looking back at that afternoon of December 23, kinikilabutan pa rin ako. Dahil iyon ang araw na na-realize ko na lahat ng humiliations na tinis ko for almost 10 years ay manipis na layers lang alikabok na nagtatakip sa isang cruelty na matagal na palang nandun. Sa point na to, baka marami ang magtanong kung bakit ako nagtiis ng ganito katagal. Honestly, nung kinasal ako, hindi ako weak na tao. May stable job ako at tinuruan ako ang parents ko to value my dignity. Pero after marrying Slater, palagi kong ni-remind yung sarili ko na sa marriage, you have to compromise. At as a manigang, never talaga akong nagustuhan totally ni Nanay Pinti. Feeling niya hindi kami mayaman at hindi ro ako kasing talino ang ibang babae na gusto niya para sa anak niya. Still, I tried. Nag-effort ako sa bawat meal, bawat kamot, bawat family gathering, hoping na ma-recognize din nila yung sincerity ko balang araw. Mali pala ako. May mga tao na habang mas nak-adjust ka, mas iisipin nilang pwede kanilang tapak-tapakan. That afternoon, nakatulog ako sandali dahil sa effect ng paracetamol. Ang isip ko naging an out of consciousness. Amaapoy ang katawan ko. Sa sala, naka-full volume pa rin ang TV, interrupted occasionally by the sound of dragging chairs, heavy footsteps, at mapagrereklamo ang biyanan ko. Half asleep ako nang biglang bumukas ng malakas ang pinto ang kwarto ko. Bumangga sa pader with a loud bang na ikinagulat ko. Nakatayo si Nanay Pinti sa pinto, nakapamewang at ang sama ing tingin, wala man lang bakas in concern para sa taong may sakit. Tiningnan niya ako from head to toe at sinabi with a harsh voice, kung ganyan ang lagay mo umuwi ka sa bahay ng nanay mo para mamatay. Huwag kang magdalaing malas sa bahay na to. Nanigas ako, thinking na baka mali lang ang narinig ko. Sa gitna ng lagnat, I thought baka sobrang galit lang siya at nagsalita ng hindi nag-isip, na she couldn't possibly say that to her sick daughter-in-law. Sinubukan kong bumangon, basak ang boses ko. Ma, may sakit po talaga ako. Sabi ga doktor bed rest muna. Pero hindi niya ako pinatapos. Pinutol niya ako with a sour tone. Sakit o walang sakit, buong taon kan healthy. Tapos magkakasakit ka exactly on December 23. Dito sa bahay kailangan neting mag-prepare para sa Noche Buena, mag-entertain ang relatives. Yung pagtambay mo diyan is bad luck. Tiningnan ko siya na may nakabara sa lalamunan ko. Almost 10 years na akong nakatira sa bahay na to. Hindi umaasa sa kanila financially kahit isang araw. Never neglecting my duties kapag holidays. Kapag sila ang nakakasakit, ako ang nag-alaga. Past years, kahit may sinat ako, bumabangon ako para magluto and prepare everything until midnight. Tapos ngayon, for the very first time na hindi ko na kaya, they look at me like a plague. Saktong pumasok si Slater. Hindi ko alam kung gaano katagal na siyang nakikinig sa labas, pero ang mukha niya was a mask of pure coldness. Walang kahit anong compassion. I thought na kapag narinig niyang nagsalita ang ganun ka-cruel ang nanay niya, he would defend me, even with just one word. Pero hindi siya humakbang palapit. He pointed his finger direct at maat sa boses na sobrang lamig na nakakapanindik balahibo. Sinabi niya, lumayas ka at umuwi sa nanay mo. Huwag kang magstay rito para sirain ang Pasko namin. Ang linyang yon ay parang saksak sa pusok. Tiningala ko ang asawa ko, the man who once promised to protect me, na humawak sa kamay ko in front of our families at sumumpang hindi niya ako sasaktan. Pero at that moment, walang hesitasyon, walang remorse, walang affeksyon sa mukha niya, puro inis at impatience lang, na parang obstakla ko na kailangang galizin asap. Anong sinabi mo? I asked with a trembling voice, almost like a last attempt to hold on to hope. May lagnat ako. Hindi yon sinagot ni Slater. Nag-gesture siya towards the door gamit ang baba niya and said bluntly, hindi mo ba gets? Umuwi ka sa inyo at doon ka magpagaling. We're busy preparing for Christmas here. Walang may time mag-alaga ang may sakit. Nakakaabala lang ang presence mo. Si Nanay Pintina na sa tabi niya, nagsmirk at nagdagdag. Hindi tumatanggap ng napalamunin ang bahay na to kapag Pasko. Ang tanda mo na tapos magkakasakit ka sa maliit na bagay. Doon ka umiyak sa mga magulang mo. At that moment, I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt. Pero the pain wasn't just physical anymore. It was the feeling of being stripped of everything, of being kicked out, of being treated like a useless object. Bigla kong narealis na hindi ito simpleng away o inis lang. Sinasadya nila akong palayasin. Pinapalayas sa kahit anong paraan. Noong December 23, when I was at my weakest, most exhausted, and most vulnerable, nanatili akong nakaupo, paralyzed for a few seconds. Humapdi ang mga mata ko and tears started falling, pero hindi ako umiyak ng malakas. I knew na that moment, crying, begging, or explaining would be completely useless. Sa harap ko, hindi na sila ang asawa at biyenan ko, kundi 2 taong nakaisa sa pagiging manhit, looking at me like a burden. Dahan-dahan kong inalis ang kumot and put my feet on the floor. Nahihilo pa rin ako at umapoy ang ulo ko, pero tumayo ako. Every step towards the cabinet felt like lead. Binuksan ko yon, kumuha ang random na damit, and stuffed them in my luggage. Sobrang nanginginig ang makamay ko that I could barely fold the clothes. Isang shirt ang nahulog sa floor at wala na akong energy para yumuko at pulutin yon. Habang tahimik akong nagpapag, walang tumulong sa akin. Walang nagtanong if I could walk. If kailangan ko ba ang grab o tricycle, kung nakainom na ba ako ang gamot. Sa kwarto, the only sound was the zipper of my luggage and my own heavy breathing. Nang kalatkarin ko ang maleta towards the door, umiwas pa si Slater para hindi ko siya masagi, and then he dropped a line so cruel and concise na hindi ko makakalimutan kailanman. Kung alis ka, huwag ka nang babalik. Tumigil ako. Ang kamay kong nakahawak sa luggage handle grip so hard na pumuti ang knuckles ko. Lumingon ako and took one last look at that house, ang bahay kung saan nilinis ko ang bawat tiles, kung saan nakpuyat ako preparing soup noong may sakit ang biyenan ko, kung saan ko inipon ang bawat piso para iparenovate ang sala, the house I called my family. Turns out, sa paningin nila, never pala talaga akong naging parting lugar na yon. At that exact moment, standing sa may pintuan nung hapon ng December 23, my heart froze. Hindi na ito simpleng sadness, it was a terrifying clarity. Nariilis ko na hindi nila ako pinapalayas dahil lang sa lagnat. And from that moment on, isang idea that I never dared to consider before started forming in my head. Hindi ako magmamakawa, alamin ko kung bakit atat na atat silang palisin ako. Kinalatkat ko ang maleta palabas inggit nila, with my legs so weak they could barely support me. Sa kalsada, humampas sa muka ko ang malamig na hangining amihan. Pero ang katawan ko ay umaapoy pa rin sa fever. Sumandal ako sa pade sa labas, panting until I caught my breath enough para mag-book in Grab o pumara ang taxi. Nang huminto yung taxi, kinailangan kong kumapit sa pinto para lang makasakay. Tiningnan ako ang driver sa rearview mirror. Baka nakita niya ang pale face at dry lips ko kaya mahina siyang nagtanong. Sa ospital po ba tayo, ma'am? Umiling ako. My voice was just a whisper. Sa bahay po ang nanay ko. Umaandar na ang sasakyan. Through the half-open window, nakita ko ang makalsadang busy dahil sa Christmas rush. Ang mga bright stores, ang makaong nagmamadaling may bit-bit na shopping bags, with rushed but excited faces. Ang makurladup sa backseat, huging my bag, umikot ang paningin, shifting from burning heat to severe fever hills. Hindi ko na maalala kung ilang kalsada ang dinaanan namin. All I remember is a suffocating feeling of desolation. Noong December 23, while everyone was looking forward to going home for family dinner, itinapon ako sa kalsada ang sarili kong asawa na parang basura. Nang huminto ang taxi sa tapat ing bahay ing nanay ko, barely had the strength para bumaba. The moment I dragged my luggage into the yard, tumakbo palabas ang nanay kong si Mommy Lenny. Pagkakita sa akin, naparalay siya at nahulog yung basahan na hawak niya. Jamil, Diyos ko, anong nangyari sa iyo? Bago pa ako makasagot, tumakbo siya para alalayan ako. Na-feel niya sigurong umaapoy at nanginginig ang katawan ko. Dahil pagawak niya sa akin, namutla siya. Ma, yon lang ang nasabi ko bago nag-blackout ang lahat. Nang imulat ko ang mga mata ko, nasa dati kong kwarto ako. The smell of alcohol, paracetamol, and my old blankets mixed together, giving me a sense of relief and at the same time, deep sadness. Sa labas, narinig ko si mama na kinakausap ang doktor sa barangay clinic. I heard her say with a broken voice, paano nila nagawang itrato ng ganyan ang anak, sa taas ang laknat niya, tapos pinalayas nila sa kalsada. Bawat salita was heavy like a stone. Gusto kong bumangon at sabihing huwag na siyang mag-alala, pero sobrang bigat ng elits ko, dry ang lalamunan ko, at parang na-drain lahat ng energy ko. Inalagaan ako ni mama the whole afternoon and night. Pinupunasan niya akong basang bimpo, sinusubuan ang mainit na sabaw. Tumawag siya ng kakilalang nurse para kabitan akong IV fluids dahil dehydrated na ako. Sa gitna ang deliryo ko, I was drifting in and out of consciousness. Minsan nakikita ko ang silhouette ni mama na nakaupo sa tabi ko, minsan naririnig ko ang nabuntong hininga niya. In a moment of clarity, narinig ko siyang hinihimas ang buhok ko and saying as if talking to herself. Ang anak ko, na mabuti at matinong babay, paano napunta sa mga taong walang narinig ko yon at naramdaman ko ang pagbara sa lalamunan ko. Pero I didn't even have the strength to cry anymore. Kinabukasan, nagsimulang bumaba ang lagnat. Masakit pa rin ang ulo ko at medyo tight ang chest ko, pero mas clear na ang isip ko. Nakahiga lang ako looking at the ceiling while thoughts raced in my mind. Kung ibang year 2, I might have consoled myself thinking na dahil lang to sa holiday stress, na everyone was just tense and said things they didn't mean. Pero hindi, the way things happened yesterday was too cold, too deliberate. The way Slater pointed at me to kick me out. The way his mother joined in na parang pinagplanuhan nila yon. The more I thought about it, the less it looked like a simple outburst of anger. Nagstart akong mag-recalling recent events. Yung mga nights na nag-stay si Slater sa sala texting until late at itatago ang phone kapag dadan ako. The calls he'd receive in the middle of the night. answering them in a low voice sa balcony, at babalik na iritado kapag tinatanong ko siya. Buhay ko to, wag kang makialam, he'd snap at me. Back then, I tried to understand. Bini-blame ko yung sarili ko for being paranoid. Pero ngayon, lying here, replaying every detail, everything clicked like puzzle pieces. Bigla kong naalala yung luma kong smartphone. Nag-upgrade ako ang phone a few months ago and kept the old one sa drawer ang luma kong desk. Dito rin sa kwartong to. Dati, for convenience, we used the same cloud account any later para mag-sync ang photos at ilang files. Nang magpalit ako ng phone, tinamat na akong mag-lockout at hindi ko na naisip na kakailanganin ko pa yon. The moment that thought crossed my mind, pumilis ang tiboking puso ko. Dahan-dahan akong umupo, binuksan ang drawer at inilabas yung old phone. Nanginginig pa rin ang nga kamay ko sa pagod. In-on ko yon at nahintay na makboot, medyo lagi ang connection, and every icon that popped up made me more nervous. Pumasok ako sa synced messages app at hinanap ang mega recent threads. At first, pure work notifs and spam promos lang, pero suddenly, isang hindi pamilyar na pangalan ang nag-pop up sa screen. Chris. Just that name was enough para makaramdam ako'ng matinding anxiety. Kinlik ko yon, and the instant I saw the first few lines, my blood ran cold. Basta umalis na siya ang bahay for Christmas, magiging perfect ang plano natin. Ang message ay galing mismo kay Slater. Na-paralyze ako, eyes locked on the screen. Isang napakaikling sentence, pero it was like a knife that shredded the last bit of hope I was holding on to. Sino siya? Anong plano yon na nakadepende sa pag-alis ko ng bahay this Christmas? Kung hindi to coincidence, then the insistence na palayasin ako kahapon, at my worst condition, wasn't an impulse. Hindi dahil sa malas o init ng ulo. It was planned, calculated. Someone was waiting for me to disappear from that house. Nag-scroll up pa ako, at the more I read, the colder I felt. Kalmado ang hangin sa kwarto. Sa labas, I could hear Mama preparing breakfast, pero sa loob ko, it was like a hurricane had been unleashed. I gripped the phone so hard na namanhit ang nga daliri ko. Isang malaking, napakalaking hinala ang dahan-dahang nabuo sa utak ko. Kung sinadya nila akong palayasin exactly on these dates, ano sa mundo ang binabalak nilang gawin sa bahay na yon habang wala ako? Nanatili akong walang kibo for a long time, staring at the screen of my old phone. The feeling wasn't just simple pain anymore. It was a chill creeping from the back of my neck down to my spine. Kung hanggang kanina I just suspected na planado, yung pagpapalayas sa akin. Now I understood na ang sitwasyon was much darker than I imagined. Huminga ako ng malalim, trying to steady my trembling hands, and continued reading the older messages. The more I read, the more my heart shrank. The messages between Slater and Chris weren't just from a few weeks or months ago. They went back more than a year. Nagsimula sa casual questions, complaints about work, at sweet comforting words na gradually turned into messages of longing, secret dates, attempts sa usapan na sa bawat linyang nababasa ko, lalong nakpapalubok sa akin. Ang lalaking umuwi araw-araw in a bad mood, na after dinner would spend hours looking at his phone without saying a word to me, turned out to be incredibly patient and sweet sa ibang babay. Naalala ko na kung sino si Chris. She worked in the same company as Slater for a while bago siya nag-resign. She was a few years younger, madaldal, palaging nagpapakita na she's an experienced and sweet woman. Pero if you looked closely, her eyes had a sharp, unsettling glint. Nakita ko siya a couple of times sa company dinners, and I even invited her over to our house once thinking nakatrabaho lang siya ing asawa ko. Back then, kabebreak lang ni Chris from a long-term toxic relationship and complained about how much she suffered. Naniloko siya, and she just wanted to find someone to lean on, a refuge. At ngayon, yung mismong babaeng yon na umupo sa harap ko flashing a fake smile, was conspiring with my husband behind my back. Nag-scroll ako sa isang message na sinend few days bago mag-Pasko. Huminto ang mamata ko sa isang linya ni Chris. This Christmas, we need to sort this out permanently. Ayoko nang maging kabit. Isang sentence lang, sapat na para manlamig ang makamay ko. Wala na akong kailangang hulan. They didn't just have an affair, they've been together long enough to plan an official future. At ang pinakamalaking obstacle na kailangan ay sort out ay ako. Right below it was Slater's reply. Binasa ko bawat salita na parang may humihiwa sa dibdib ko using a dull knife. Don't worry, the moment she leaves, mapapasa atin ang lahat. Ang lahat. Nag-echo yung word na yon sa utak ko. Kung gusto lang niya akong iwan for someone else, he wouldn't have said ang lahat. He would have said, pakakasalan kita o makikipahiwalay ako sa kanya. Pero no, he mentioned lahat in a very clear, practical way, revealing his true greedy nature. Nanatili akong tahimik, trying to piece things together in my mind. Bakit kailangan nila akong palayasin exactly sa Pasko? Bakit atat na atat si Chris? Bakit sobrang confident magsalita si Slater? As if ang pagkawala ko sa bahay guaranteed the success of their plan. Bigla akong may naalala. About a month ago, Slater casually asked me a few times about the land title of the house. Minsan nagkukunwari siyang curious. Babe, saan mo ba tinatago yung mapapelezing bahay? Baka kailanganin natin for some transactions in the future. Minsan nagpapacute, medyo awkward na nakapanggalan lang sayo yung bahay. Bilang mag-asawa, it should be under both our names para mas madali ang mabagay-bagay. Minsan nga, umupo siya sa tabi ko and with rare sweetness said, I'm thinking of getting a business loan. Paano kaya kung ikolateral muna natin yung bahay? At that time, I firmly refused dahil ang bahay na yon was a pre-wedding gift from my parents, paraphernal property. Ayokong galawin yon. He acted offended, saying nawala ro akong tiwala sa asawa ko. I thought na bruise lang yung ego niya. Never did I imagine na wala ni isa sa mga questions na yun ang inosente. Thinking about this, tumas ang balahibo sa batok ko. Ang bahay is registered under my name. Isa itong paraphernal property, something my parents worked their whole lives for just to give me a safety net. Kung sinadya nilang palayasin ako at my worst moment, saktong-sakto sa holidays where everyone is busy, neighbors are distracted, and government offices tulad ng assessor's office at registry of deeds are on skeletal workforce so sarado. It was highly probable na they were taking advantage of the timing para gumawa ng milagro sa mga papeles ng bahay. Linlangin ako para pumirma, magforging documents, special power of attorney, o magdala ng tao para i-appraise ang property and get a down payment. The consequences wouldn't just be an unfaithful husband anymore. Agad kong kinuha ang phone and called their landline. 1 ring, 2, 3, no answer. Tinawagan ko si Slater. Nagring ang ilang beses tapos dinrop niya. Tinawagan ko number ni Nanay Pinti. Wala pa ring sagot. The anxiety in my chest grew by the second. In a normal situation, no matter how angry they were, sasagutin nila yon kahit para lang sigawan ako at maglabasing inis. Pero wala, total silence. As if they were so busy with something so important na ayaw nilang maistorbo. Nakatayo ako roon, paralyzed, nang mag-vibrate ang phone ko. Message from Lita, my neighbor 2 houses down, a woman who had always been nice to me. The text was short, pero pagabasa ko, my heart skipped a beat. Jamil, bakit ang daming ibang tao sa bahay ninyo ngayon? Tinitigan ko ang screen with a dry throat. Lita immediately added, may nakita akong nakabihis na babae na dumating kaninang umaga. Tapos dalawang lalaki na may dalang ma-attache case. Ang biyenan mo labas pasok sa gate, palingalinga sa labas. May nangyayari ba? At that moment, wala na akong kahit anong doubt. All my fears were coming true. Habang nakaratay ako sa bahay ni Mama dahil sa lagnat, still shocked from being kicked out. Sa sarili kong bahay they were receiving strangers not one, but several. Isang hindi kilalang babay, dalawang lalaking may bit-bit na briefcase, marahil mag-aahente o notaryo publiko. Linking this to the messages I just read, I understood na wala itong magandang ibig sabihin. I gripped my phone, feeling a mix of rage and panic. Turns out, ang true purpose ng pagpapalayas sa akin was not just to have freedom, nor simply to humiliate me on Christmas. Sinasamantala nila ang pagkawala ko to execute a much bigger plan, a calculated plot with outside accomplices, a clear objective, and highly likely, that objective was the house registered under my name. Tumingala ako sa bintana. The late December sky was clear. Sumisikat ang araw at sa kalsada naririnig ang ingay nga managrarush bumili for Christmas, pero sa loop ko nagdilim ang lahat. I understood na kung mag-stay ako ritong nakaiga at umiyak, In a short time I could lose not just my husband, but also the last pillar I had in my life. And at that instant, isang thought na sobrang lamig na nagulat pa ang sarili ko crossed my mind. Kailangan kong malaman kahit ano pa ang mangyari. Ano ang binabalak nila sa likod ko sa bahay na yon? Nanatili akong nakaupo for a few more seconds, forcing myself to breathe slowly. Kung ako yung Camille from a few years ago, probably tatawag na ako ng hysterical. Iyak, tatakbo sa kalsada ignoring the fever. Pero ewan ko ba, right at that moment when I felt cornered, my mind completely cleared up maybe from working as an accountant for so many years. Sanay ako na kapag mas magulo ang ledger, mas kailangan di kalmado para mareconcile ito. Panic wouldn't help me keep my house, at ang galuha won't soften those who are conspiring against me. Ang kailangan kong gawin is quickly check kung anong baraha ang hawak ko at hanggang saan abot ang kawalang hiyaan nila. Binuksan ko ang drawing bedside table at kinuha ang isang brown envelope na palaging itinatago ni Mama para sa akin. Thank God, never kong dinala lahat ng original important documents ko sa bahay ni Slater. Ang original TCT, Transfer Certificate of Title, ang Deed of Donation ang parents ko, ang marriage certificate, ilang contracts related sa bahay lahat yon ginawan ko in kopya at itinago ng hiwalay. I checked every page, every line, every signature. Ang bahay is still under my name. Ang Deed of Donation as paraphernal property prior to marriage is intact. Walang existing special power of attorney, SPA, na nakapanggalan kay Slater. The more I reviewed them, the more certain I was of one thing. Without my signature, they cannot legally transfer or mortgage the house, pero hindi pa rin ako mapanata kung nakayanan nilang lokohin ako for over a year at planuhin ang pagpapalayas sa akin sa Pasko. Capable din silang gumamit ng mas maruruming tactics to force me to sign. I forge yung signature ko, or accept an earnest money down payment from a buyer to create a done deal. I was reviewing the papers when a fleeting memory crossed my mind. It was a small detail, pero sapat na para bumilis ang tibok ng puso ko. About 6 months ago, after magnanakaw broke into a neighbor's house in broad daylight, palihim akong nagpakabiting CCTV system, not out of distrust, but because madalas umalis ng maga at umuwi ng late si Slater, and Nanay Pinty is left alone at home. Mas safe ako with cameras. Naglagay ako ang isa sa sala, isa sa main door, at isa sa kusina, and linked the app to my phone to view them remotely. Ang alam lang ni Slater may mga camera for security, pero wala siyang ideya sa admin account or how to access it. Over time, naging busy ako sa work at hindi ko na halos chine-check, almost forgetting they existed. Thinking about it, kinuha ko ang phone ko at in-open yung app na matagal ko nang hindi nagagamit. Nakasave pa rin ang password. The screen loaded for a few seconds that felt like eternity. Pinagpapawisan ang makamay ko despite the chills I felt from the meds wearing off, and then the feeds appeared. Una yung kamera sa pinto, tapos sa sala. I pressed my face to the screen at naramdaman kong nanigas ang buong katawan ko. Sa gitna nega sala ko, nakaupo si Slater sa sofa. Sa tabi niya, walang iba kundi si Chris. Wala na siyang hitsurang timid and reserved kaya nega-mega times na nakita ko siya. Nakaupo siyang nakadekwatro with total naturalness na parang bahay niya yon, may hawak na basong yisti. Ang biyanan ko labas-pasok, occasionally peeking through the window na parang may binabantayan. A few seconds later, the doorbell rang. A isang middle-aged man in a polo shirt with a briefcase entered the house. Sa likod niya, another younger man na nakagel ang buhok. May bit-bit itong folder. Nobody needed to tell me. Nalaman ko agad na isa sa kanila is involved in real estate the way he walked, opened the briefcase, took out the documents, and spread them on the table. Nakilala ko agad, pinigilan ko ang hininga ko and turned up the volume. Hindi perfect yung audio, pero enough to understand a few phrases. Binuksan ng matandang lalaki ang folder, may itinura at mahinang nagsalita. Yumuko si Slater para tingnan and nodded. Ang biyenan ko sa tabi niya asked impatiently, "Pwede bang pabilisin?" Ayaw nating tumagal pa to. The man answered something and then I clearly heard Slater say in a low, urgent voice, "Ay handa ninyo ang lahat. Kailangang mapirmahan ito before the 27th. Before the 27th, the words gave me goosebumps. Totoo nga, sinasamantala nila ang holidays to close some kind of deal. A deal directly related sa mga papeles. A deal that, If delayed beyond the 26th or 27th, I could come back and stop it. Mahigpit kong hinawakan ang phone, without taking my eyes off the screen. At that moment, Chris smiled smugly, leaning back on the sofa. Cold ang boses niya. Ang tangang yon hindi maglalakas na bumalik. Narinig ko ang masalita niya at naramdaman ko ang pagliyab-ing galit na umakyat sa dibdib ko. Her words weren't a guess, kundi absolute contempt, a total disrespect towards me. Right after, Slater let out a dry laugh, a laugh whose true nature I had never perceived so clearly in almost 10 years of marriage. And he said, "Sure yon, mahina yon eh. Pag pinalayas mo, alis at hindi na babalik." Nanigas ako. Mahina. That word, coming from the mouth of the man I stayed up all night for when he had a fever. The one I moved heaven and earth for nang manganib ang business niya. The one I endured everything for almost 10 years just to keep the peace at home. Lumalabas na sa paningin niya, I was just a weak woman, isang babaeng pwedeng palayasin, pwedeng i-pressure, isang babaeng kahit gaano pa masaktan, alam lang lunukin ang ngaluha niya. For the first time in my life, I didn't just feel betrayed, but deeply insulted to the core. Umaapoy ang mata ko, barado ang ilong ko, pero wala ni isang luhang pumatak. Something inside me had just broken, pero at the same time, something new had just awakened. Tinitigan ko ang tatlong tao sa screen. I saw the true faces of my husband, that woman, and my mother-in-law. At dahan-dahan kong ikinuyom ang kabilang kamay ko nang napakahigpit na bumaon ang ngakuko ko sa palat ko. For the first time in almost 10 years as a wife and daughter-in-law, hindi ko inisip ang magtiis, magmakawa, o mag-explain. They chose to kick me out when I was sickest. They chose to conspire over the house registered in my name. They were convinced na masyado akong duwag para harapin sila. Pues, if they considered me that easy to intimidate, hindi ko hahayaang makalusot sila. Ibinaba ko ang phone sa kama at isang cold smile, na kahit ako'y naging estranghero, ang gumuhit sa amgalabi ko. My hoarse voice from the fever sounded surprisingly clear. Kung gusto ninyong maglaro, maglalaro tayo hanggang dulo. Ang malamig na ngiting yon ay saglit lang. Pero sapat na para ma-realize ko na from that moment on, hindi na ako ang babaeng umiyak habang yakap ang unan sa isang sulok. Isinantabi ko ang kumot at naupo na nakasandal sa headboard. Pagod pa rin ang katawan ko from the meds and my head ached, pero my eyes were extra awake. That night, I barely took my hands off the phone. I plugged it into a power bank, activated screen recording, at binantayan ko ang bahay minute by minute via the CCTV app. From being the evicted and aimless victim, I started seeing my own house with different eyes. Every moving shadow, every conversation sa sala, every time my mother-in-law peeked out the window. Ni-record ko lahat. Pumasok si mama ang ilang beses at nang makita niya akong tutok sa phone, she looked worried. I nodded to reassure her, pero alam ko na kung bibitawan ko ang phone that time, by the next morning it could be too late. Sabi nila kapag ang isang babae ay nakona, either she crumbles or she rises stronger. That Noche Buena, I was the latter. Around 9 p.m., the living room camera captured a scene na nagpahigpit ing hawak ko sa phone hanggang mamanhid ang daliri ko. Pababa si Chris sa hagdan, pero what took my breath away wasn't just her shameless presence in my house, kundi yung damit na suot niya. Suot niya yung favorite cream pajama set ko with small blue flowers, a soft fabric I loved. Ako mismo ang bumili nun sa isang mall sale early this year. I remember when I brought it home, Slater told me the color suited me well, giving me a serene look. And now that woman was wearing it, walking around my living room as if she were the lady of the house. Umupo si Chris sa sofa, nag-cross legs very naturally, took a cup of hot chocolate, and smiled at Slater. Moments later, Slater came from the kitchen with a plate of sliced fruits that Nanay Pinty just prepared and sat next to her. Wala nang trace of caution or secrecy like in their hidden messages. In front of the cameras, in the house registered under my name, he put his arm around Chris's shoulders and pulled her close, and with a mocking laugh that made my heart stop when I heard it, he said, "Mula ngayon, bahay mo na ito. Don't be scared." Nanigas ako. There are phrases that, even without being shouted, are devastating. Mula ngayon, bahay mo na ito. With that single sentence, shattered lahating last illusions ko. It wasn't just a suspicion or a passing fling anymore. I was officially eliminated, at ang bahay ko an object that would soon change owners. Tinakpan ko ang kamay ko ang bibig ko, not to hold back tears, but to suppress the nausea rising in my throat. Masakit. Pero strangely my mind cleared up even more. Habang mas nakikita ko ang totoong kulay nila, mas nawawalan ang room for weakness. Around 10 p.m. tumunog ang doorbell. Ipakita sa outdoor camera ang dalawang lalaki from earlier today. One had a briefcase, the other a folder. Nagmamadaling nagbukas si Nanay Pinti, looking both ways sa kalsada before letting them in. As soon as they sat down, she took out a stack of papers carefully stored in a plastic envelope from a cabinet. Pinasingkit ko ang mga mata ko, my heart beating 1,000 miles a minute. Kahit hindi HD ang feed, I recognized the red border of the certified true copies. Ipinatong yun ang biyenan ko sa mesa at sinabing may mahinang boses, pero loud enough for the camera's mic to pick up. Kailangang mabilis ito. Bago mag-ika-27. Pak bumalik siya, sira ang lahat. Nag-zoom in ako sa screen. The papers reflected a bit of light, pero sa header-ing first page, clear yung siling registry of deeds. I stared at it for a few seconds at naramdaman kong nablangko ang utak ko. Photocopy yon ing TCT, len title, na nakapangalan sa akin. No doubt ang selyo, the staple, even the small blue ink stain na ako mismo ang nakagawa ng i-photocopy ko yon. Everything matched. Hindi lang sila nag-usap. They had already rummaged through my things, prepared the documents, and were negotiating with third parties sa gitna Noche Buena. I was still trying to keep calm nang may isa pang sentence na umabot sa pandinig ko at nagpanlamig sa dugo ko. Si Chris, leaning on the sofa, looked at the papers at sinabi sa mahay ng boses, pero with a tone sharp as a razor. What if magfog tayong special power of attorney spa? Pumirma tayo en wirdan. Walang makakaalam. Naramdaman ko ang pagtayoing balahibo ko. She didn't say it as a random thought, kundi as something she had already considered quickly and efficiently, as if forging someone's signature was the most normal thing in the world. Pero the most horrifying part was Slater's reaction. Hindi niya sinabihan si Chris na manahimik, nor did he show the slightest fear of committing a crime, falsification of public documents. Umiling lang siya, gave a half smile, and replied, hindi na kailangan. I pay pressure natin siyang pumirma for a waiver and extrajudicial settlement later. By then, wala na siyang matitira. I pressure para pumirma. By then, wala na akong matitira. I closed my eyes for a second. Their plan wasn't just taking advantage of my absence. Nag-isip na sila ang next step. Somehow, pagbalik ko, ikukunan nila ako to sign a waiver of property rights, maybe using family pressure, defaming me, threatening me, or even inventing something to force me. They hadn't just betrayed our marriage. They were preparing a premeditated property theft with a plan, accomplices, and defined roles. I didn't let myself stay paralyzed for another second. Immediately I started saving every video clip, every audio, kinopya ko lahat sa memory ing phone ko at ipinadala sa personal email ko. For extra security, I forwarded it to another old email account and connected the phone to my laptop to make a local backup. I did it all quickly, almost by instinct, like someone terrified that the evidence could disappear any second. Every action made my head spin from exhaustion, pero naglikit ako ang gipin and pushed through to the end. Nang masend successfully yung last copy, sumandala ko sa unan at naglabas ing mahabang buntong hininga. Sa labas, naririnig na ang mapaputok ang Noche Buena from afar. At sa maliit na kwarto ang bahay ang nanay ko, I lay there with my eyes fixed on the ceiling. Masakit pa rin ang dibdib ko, pero my heart was cold and firm like steel. Akala nila I was weak. They thought na pag Pinalayas nila ako, I would just cry and let them do whatever they wanted. At nang gabing yon yung Noche Buena, I told myself with a clarity that admitted no turning back. Akala niyo ba mahina ako? This time, hindi ko kayo bibigyan aras makareact. That Noche Buena I barely slept. Not because of the fever that left my body exhausted, kundi dahil my mind was too awake. So awake that every word captured by the cameras, every smile of Chris, every furtive glance of my mother-in-law repeated in my head with crystal clarity. Magumaga na sa labas. Sa bakuran ni Mama, I could already hear the sound of the walis ting-ting sweeping leaves, a neighbor opening their gate, someone saying Merry Christmas with a sleepy voice. A new day, pero sa puso ko walang trace of joy. I knew na kung gusto kong mabawi ang control, I couldn't keep waiting for them to act. I had to strike first on Christmas morning. After taking my meds, umupo ako sa kama and rewatched all the videos I had saved. Pinili ko ang pinakamaikli and clearest one. The scene where Slater hugged Chris in my living room while saying that line that humiliated me to the core. Mula ngayon, bahay mo na ito. Don't be scared. In-edit ko yung video to be just a few seconds. Sapat lang para hindi niya madani. Sapat lang for him to understand that I knew much more than he imagined. Pero before sending it, may kailangan pa akong gawin. I stared at my phone screen for a few seconds at dinial ang number ni Slater. Matagal bago niya sinagot. I thought he wouldn't pick up, pero sa huling ring he answered. His voice sounded sleepy, pero kasing sungit pa rin ng dati. Anong kailangan mo? Binaban ko ang tone ng boses ko on purpose, making it sound weak, hoarse, and broken, as if I had just been crying. Sorry. Siguro naistorbo ko kayo kahapon. Pinag-isipan ko na, hindi na ako babalik. Sa kabilang line, may silence for a few seconds. I understood from that silence na na-surprise siya. Probably he didn't expect me to call with such a submissive voice, nor say that. Pero the silence didn't last long. An instant later, he replied with absolute coldness, without hesitation. Di mas mabuti. Hearing those words, I no longer felt the same pain as on December 23. Siguro I had already hit rock bottom. Ngayon, hearing my own husband admit that he wanted me to disappear, I just felt an intense cold born when you see the true face of the person in front of you. Wala na akong idinagdag. I hung up and, without hesitating for a second, in open ko yung chat app namin and sent the video I edited. No text, no explanations, just the video. I left the phone beside my pillow at pinanood ang screen. 1 second, 2, 5, and in less than 10 seconds, the phone started vibrating like crazy. Slater's name flashed on the screen non-stop. Hinayan ko munang magring ing ilang beses bago ko sinagot. As soon as I picked up, his voice exploded in my ear. No trace of calmness. Saan mo nakuha yan? Muntik na akong matawa. The day before, he kicked me out with an icy expression. The night before, he was hugging his mistress in my house, and now a simple video had unhinged him to the point of losing control of his voice. I smiled slightly and said very slowly, word by word. Kung saan ko nakuha, hindi mahalaga. Ang mahalaga, mas marami pa kong hawak kaysa rito. Sa kabilang line, it went totally silent. Halos marinig ko yung mabilis niyang pahinga. Then his tone dropped, pero the softer he spoke, the more evident his panic was. Camille, makinig ka, it's not what you think. I let out a short laugh, pero sobrang lamig, that even I was surprised, na hindi tulad ng iniisip ko. Kung ganon, ano yon? Nagyayakapan kayo sa sala ko para makatipid sa kuryente ng aircon? Slater didn't have time to answer. Narinig ko yung pag-agawan sa kabilang line and a voice sharp as a razor took over the phone. Ang biyenan ko yon. She probably snatched the phone from her son. Her voice was a growl. It no longer had the sour, complaining tone from before, kundi a mix of threat and persuasion. Napaupo ako. If before, the word family would have softened me, ngayon hindi na. I answered her instantly, without fear or hesitation. Anong pamilya? Yung pamilyang papalalayasin ako sa bahay kapag may sakit ako para nakawin yung titulo ng bahay ko? Sa kabilang line, dead silence. That silence confirmed na yung first strike ko hit the bullseye. Only those caught red-handed stay quiet like that. Hindi sumigaw si Nanay Pinti at hindi rin nang insulto tulad ng dati. Slater didn't dare interrupt. It was clear that they started to doubt. They didn't expect na hindi lang pala ako aware sa infidelity, but that I had hard evidence, and much less did they expect me to boldly name the plot they were hatching behind my back. A few seconds later, Slater got the phone back. This time he didn't yell. Kundi adopted a falsely conciliatory tone. Huwag kang ma-stress, may sakit ka. Don't imagine things. Paano kaya kung sunduin kita and we talk about this properly? I gripped the phone and looked at the pale light of Christmas Day coming through the window. Susunduin para saan? Para ipagpatuloy ang pagpresya sa akin na pumima sa isang settlement at waiver, para mag-set up inji another fake happy family show. Ngumiti ako ng may pait at hindi ko siya hinayaang magpatuloy. No need to pick me up. At binabalaan kita, subukan mo lang galawin ang property ko. I paused long enough for him to understand I wasn't joking, and then continued slowly, savoring every word. I'll make sure the whole clan knows exactly what kind of people you really are. Sa kabilang line, total silence. Walang sumigaw, walang naklecture, walang naglakas loob na magsalita pa. I heard someone sigh and then rushed footsteps, as if Nanay Pinty was dragging Slater aside to ask him something in a low voice. I imagined them all in the living room with pale faces, passing the phone like a hot potato. Hindi na ako nahintay. I hung up. I left the phone aside and leaned against the wall. Pagod pa rin ako. Sumasakit ang dibdib ko at bumibigat ang ulo ko, pero I felt something very different. It wasn't satisfaction or joy, kundi the feeling of someone who finally knows they are no longer cornered. For years, I yielded so much that they thought I didn't know how to defend myself. Pero for once, I was going to show them that I'm not a woman you can just kick out and rob at your whim. And that same Christmas morning, I knew one thing for sure. This was just the first move. Pero judging by their panic, for the first time, ako na ang hindi nangginginig. I thought na after my Christmas morning call, at least magiging cautious muna sila for a few days to rethink their strategy. A normal person, knowing that the other party has evidence of an affair and a plot to steal their assets, would get scared, back down, act carefully. Pero I forgot one thing. Those who are capable of kicking out their wife with a high fever on December 23 no longer act like decent people. Hindi sila umatras. Instead, they decided to attack with more force, more dirt, more recklessness. Morning of December 26. Kakatapos ko lang uminom ng gamot and I was sitting by the window nang mag-vibrate ang phone ko. Message from Slater, isang maikling sentence, as short as it was chilling. Kung gusto mong matapos to ng tahimik, bumalik ka at pumirma ka sa annulment papers at waiver of rights. Tinitigan ko ang screen for a few seconds. Ni isang apology, ni isang explanation, ni the slightest shame after everything I had discovered. Isang condition lang, expressed as if he was giving an order to a subordinate. Below the message, he attached a photo. Binuksan ko yon. It was the draft of a petition for annulment. I read every line at isang bitter smile formed on my lips. Not out of joy. Kundi dahil the more I read, the clearer I saw the magnitude of his greed and shamelessness, surpassing anything I could have imagined. Sa draft, the ground for annulment was carefully worded, psychological incapacity, mutually agreed upon. Pero the bottom part revealed his true intention. Nakalagay na ako, si kami, voluntarily waives any right over the conjugal properties and will not file any future claim regarding the house, money, or material assets post-annulment. Waiver of property rights. Napahagalpak akong tawa, isang dry and bitter laugh. So hindi lang nila ako gustong palayasin, they wanted me to sign a paper to legalize everything, turning me from a victim of betrayal into someone who willingly gave up everything. They wanted what? Na kung may magtanong in the future, they'd just have to show that paper to look clean, so nobody could reproach them for anything. Wow, napakagaling nilang magkalkula. Hanggang sa point na nakakadiri, hindi ko pa nare-reply, nang mag-ring ang phone ko. Galing yon sa number ni Tita Betty, isang malayong tita in pamilya ni Slater. I hesitated for a moment, pero sinagot ko rin. As soon as I brought the phone to my ear, I heard her voice, a mix of surprise and probing. Camille, totoo ba na iniwan mo raw ang asawa mo for another man? Nanigas ako. Her words were like a bucket of dirty water thrown at my face. Nakaupo akong matigas on the edge of the bed with the hand holding the phone freezing cold. It had only been a day, one single day since they found out I had evidence, and this was their counteroffensive. Hindi to apology or negotiation. Isa itong smear campaign to destroy my reputation first, dahil alam nila na sa buhay na to. There are things that hurt as much as losing money, losing your honor, being pointed at, having the whole family whisper behind your back that you're an adulterous woman. I tried to keep my voice steady. Sino pong nagsabi niyan? Tita Betty lowered her voice as if telling a secret. Sino pa ba? Di family ing asawa mo. Sabi nila, matagal ka na raw may ibang lalaki, tapos nahuli ka daw nila kaya ka naglayas, at ngayong bumalik ka raw to claim the house and cause a scandal. Nashock ako kaya tumawag ako to know what's true. Hindi ako agad sumagat. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I was trying to swallow the lump that formed in my throat. So ito pala yung next move nila. Since they couldn't scare me with threats, they directly attacked my honor, turning me into the guilty party, the wife who abandoned her husband for a lover, so that if I said anything, people would doubt me. Sino ba naman ang maniniwala sa isang babaeng inakusahan ang pakikiapit? After that call, my phone didn't stop ringing. An aunt, an uncle, a cousin from Slater's side, all sending ambiguous messages. Some asked, "Anong nangyayari, ineng?" Others sighed, "Ang babay dapat alam ang lugar niya." May isa pang directly told me, "At the end of the day, manugang ka lang. Kung nagkamali ka, bumalik ka at mag-sorry para tahimik na." Tiningnan ko yung avalanche of messages and I felt a glacial cold. The rumor had spread, and very fast. It was obvious na hindi to kakalat ng ganito kung walang sadyang nagpakalat nito. Naintindihan ko ang goal nila. Gusto nila akong isolate. They wanted the shame and criticism to make me feel so cornered that I'd surrender. Kapag ang isang babay ay labis na nasiran, either she goes crazy or she gets so tired that she signs anything just to be left alone. Nagbet sila na ako yung second type, na I would care more about the chismis than losing everything. That I'd yield just to save a bit of my reputation. Nagkamali na naman sila. Almost noon, tumawag si Nanay Pinti. Pagkasagot ko pa lang, narinig ko yung fakasops niya. Nagsimula siya with a broken voice na kung hindi ko siya kilala, I would have thought she was genuinely sorry for me. "Jamil, anak, kung gagawin mo to, paano natin haharapin ang pamilya?" Buong umaga nang nagriring ang phone ko sa damiing nagtatanong. Matanda na ako. Huwag mo naman akong bigyan ng ganitong kahihiyan. Pinakinggan ko siya in silence. I listened to every fake sob, every moralistic phrase she used as a shield. Expert siya. Kakatapos lang niyang mag-spread ang rumor to destroy me, and now she's playing the victim. Kung ako yung Camille from before, her voice would have softened me, pero ngayon natatawa na lang ako. Pinutol ko siya without letting her continue her act. Ang boses ko sounded so cold na kahit ako nagulat. I continue niyo lang ang pag-arte niyo ma. Sa kabilang line, nanahimik siya. Probably didn't expect me to speak to her so frankly. I continued slowly, word by word. Napakagaling niyong actress. Umarte kayo nung pinalayas niyo ako sa bahay. Umarte kayo nang i-spread niyo ang rumor na may kabit ako. At ngayon umarte kayong biktima. Keep acting. Very soon bibigyan ko kayo an stage with 100 spectators. I hung up right after that sentence. As soon as I cut the call, the room fell silent. The only sound was the soft hum of the electric fan at ang tibok ng puso ko. Sa labas, people were still visiting, laughing, and celebrating. Ako, sitting there, understood one thing clearer than ever. Hindi sila titigil if I keep yielding. Para sa kanila, the more I stayed quiet, the easier it was to pressure me. The more I endured, the more I deserved to be trampled on. Their last attack was dirty, yes, pero it also helped me see the true face of that entire family. None of them left me a dignified way out. At nung tanghali ing December 26, I understood na hindi na ito away mag-asawa o in-law conflict. It was calculated harassment, and if they were willing to drag me through the mud to force me to sign, I had to stand up. Not just to save my house, but to save my honor. After the call with my mother-in-law, nanatili akong nakaupo for a long time on the edge of the bed, looking at the sunny yard while my mind drafted a plan. They chose to defame me before the whole family, which meant wala na silang pakialam sa pagsaving face. And when people reach that extreme, a few videos or phone warnings are not enough to stop them. If I kept attacking on a small scale, I'd only give them time to invent more lies and keep cornering me. To end this, kailangan kong ilapag yung ultimate card, a card that, once on the table, they couldn't deny. As soon as the idea formed in my mind, alam ko na kung anong gagawin ko. Hindi makipagkita sa kapehan para mag-usap ni makipag-argue on the phone. Haharapin ko sila in front of the whole family, in the exact same place where they were trying to paint me as the guilty one. If they used the chismis as a weapon, I'd make that same weapon turn against them. And the best time was none other than December 27, kapag puno ang bahay ang tao for a post-Christmas family reunion. Kapag isang salita lang was enough for the truth to spread like wildfire. Kinuha ko ang phone at nag-send en isang single, short message kay Slater. Sige. Babalik ako sa 27 para pumema at tapusin ang lahat. Wala pang isang minuto nang mag-reply siya. So fast na I knew he was waiting for that message. Lumito yung words sa screen, as cold and short as his usual tone. Kung naging matalino ka sana simula pa lang, naiwasan mo sana ang gulo. Tiningnan ko yung words na yon and an ironic smile formed on my lips. He was convinced. Convinced na I was tired, na the criticisms from the family had broken me. Convinced na with a little more pressure I would obediently sign his waiver and annulment papers. The more he believed it, the deeper he walked into the trap I was setting for him. Pero for this move, I couldn't rely just on my anger. Kailangan ko ang documentary evidence, someone who understood the law, something that would leave them without any possibility of replying. I searched my contacts for the number of Ati Libayan, an acquaintance lawyer from my old company. I had worked with him on some contractual disputes and knew he was discreet and efficient. Tinawagan ko siya at ikinuwento ang story clearly and concisely. Sa kabilang line, he stayed silent for a moment and then asked very specific questions about the house, the deed of donation as paraphernal property, at young videos and messages na meron ako. I answered everything without adding or removing anything, without letting emotions interfere. Nang matapos ako, calmly said Ati Libayan, kung tama lahat nga sinabi mo, hindi na lang to simpleng marital issue. May clear indicators ng attempted estafa and economic abuse under RA 9262 VAWC. Keep calm. I print mo lahating ebidensya na meron ka videos, messages, recordings, screenshots. Make several copies. Bukas, if you need it, ipagahanda kita yung draft complaint affidavit to proceed. Hearing that, I felt much more secure. Ang gusto nila was to turn me into a hysterical woman who only knew how to cry, without proof to back her words. Pero hindi na ngayon. May evidence ako, may lawyer ako, and most importantly, I had enough mental clarity not to act on impulse. Happening 26, while Mama was preparing dinner, umupo ako sa lumang desk ko. I opened my laptop and connected the phone to transfer all the data, every CCTV video clip, every conversation between Slater and Chris, every recording of their plans regarding the papers. Piningalanan ko lahat ng malinaw and sorted them by date and time. Nagtake din ako ang screenshots of the faces and messages. Ang printer sa bahay hadn't been used in a while, pero that day inon ko at nagsimulang magprint. The sound of the machine in the quiet afternoon sounded as dry and decisive as my heart at that moment. One page after another, all in black and white, irrefutable. Hindi na ito yung salita ko laban sa salita nila. Everything was on paper. After printing, I made another call. This time not to a lawyer, kundi to someone just as important. Si Don Roding, ang uncle ni Slater, a man with a great reputation in the family and known for his frankness. Hindi siya yung tipong nakikialam sa issues ng iba, pero if he saw an injustice, he wouldn't stay quiet for anyone. Kahit never kaming naging super close, palagi niya akong tinatrato with respect. I knew na if someone could make the whole clan listen, it was him. Inexplain ko carefully na babalik ako sa bahay sa 27 to resolve a very important matter. I asked him na if he could. Duman siya saglit because I needed a witness and someone with enough authority in the family to hear the whole story. Don Roding didn't ask unnecessary questions, stayed silent for a few seconds and then said, "Sige, I'll be there sa 27. Kung talagang may binabalak silang masama, huwag kang mag-alala, I'll be present." Pagkababa ang tawag, I felt I could finally take a deep breath. Buong araw akong on edge. With Don Roding's confirmation, I felt the game was starting to tilt in my favor. Akala nila they were summoning me to force me to sign, pero hindi. I was the one bringing them to the place with the most witnesses, at the perfect moment to unmask them, sa isang sitwasyon na hindi na sila makaka-back out. Gabiing 26, I barely slept. Not out of weakness or fever, but because I had too many things to secure. I reviewed every file, sorted the papers, and jotted down ideas in a notebook. Mama brought me a glass of hot milk, and seeing me still sitting at the desk, she lingered at the door for a moment and then asked in a low voice, "Anak, paano kung saktan ka nila?" Tiningala ko siya and looked at her. For the first time in days, my voice sounded stable. Sigurado ako ma. This time, I'm not going to lose. Mama didn't say anything else. Lumapit siya and placed a hand on my shoulder. It wasn't a gesture to stop me, kundi a silent support. She knew they had cornered me to the limit and that if I didn't put an end to this, that family would keep trampling on me my whole life. Madaling araw, nilabas ko sa kabinet ang pinaka-formal kong damit na nadala ko. I chose a dark blouse and discreet slacks hindi para magpa-impress, kundi so that when I entered that house, my image wouldn't be that of a sick, humiliated woman dragging a suitcase. I combed my hair, prepared the folder with the documents, checked the phone, power bank, and keys. Tapos umupo ako sa edge of the bed. Sa labas, it was still dark, pero in my mind, every step was clear. Only a few hours left. A few hours where they'd believe they were about to win. And a few hours where, in their own house, pagbabayaran nila lahat ng ginawa nila sa akin. Umaga ing December 27, I woke up very early. Wala na yung lagnat. Though I was still tired and had a slight tightness in my chest, my mind was more lucid than ever. I put on the clothes I prepared, tied my hair up, packed all the documents and phone in my bag, and looked at myself in the mirror for a good while. The woman in the reflection was no longer the pale, trembling person who was kicked out on the 23rd. Ako pa rin tu, pero a version that had stopped pitying herself. Nahihintay si mama sa pinto, eyes red, pero didn't say anything to stop me. Inabutan lang niya akong boteeng tubig at bumulong. Kung may mangyari, tawagan mo ko agad. Tumango ako, squeezed her hand, and left. Ang kalsada, though still with a festive air, was quieter than the previous days. People were visiting, eating, strolling. Ako, on the other hand, was in a grab car with a frozen heart. The closer I got to my husband's house, the slower my heart beat. Wala na yung agitation ing my past days. When one has decided what to do, fear shrinks. Huminto ang sasakyan in front of the gate. May ilang cars na nakaparada. As I suspected, today had more people than usual. Nagbayad ako, stepped out, straightened my shoulders, and walked in. Opening the gate, the mixed scent of incense, desserts, and food hit me. Sa sala, several relatives were sitting, drinking coffee, and chatting. The laughter stopped dead the instant they saw me enter. I didn't lower my head nor show weakness. I walked with firm steps, as if that house had never stopped being mine. At saktong-sakto, in the center of the living room, nakaupo na si Slater sa main sofa. Sa harap niya, isang stack of papers. Sa tabi niya, si Chris, dressed to the nines, with a pose halfway between timid and arrogant. Si Nanay Pinti, standing behind her son with crossed arms and a cold, defiant look. Pagkakita sa akin, Slater pointed with his chin towards the chair opposite him and said with a dry tone, like giving an order. Umupo ka. I put my bag down, pulled the chair, and sat slowly. He didn't greet me, didn't ask if I was better, not a single kind word, simply grabbed the papers and pushed them towards me. Dumulasyon across the table and stopped right in front of me, and he said with cutting coldness, Pirmahan mo. Tapos, kanya-kanya na tayo. Tiningnan ko ang mapapeles without touching them. It was the annulment draft and the waiver of property rights they had prepared. Sa tabi niya, Chris remained silent, pero a faint smile of triumph formed on her lips. Tiningnan ni ako up and down as if saying, in the end, you had to surrender. Si Nanay Pinti, seeing that I wasn't touching the papers, added from above with her acidic voice, Tama na ang ma-eskandalong ginawa mo nitong manakarang ara. The whole living room fell silent. The relatives were still there, pero now everyone was holding their breath. Watching, I knew what they expected to see. Kung paano magre-react yung daughter-in-law accused of infidelity, the one who supposedly caused a scandal over the house, would she kneel, cry, or obediently sign? Inangat ko yung first page, skimmed it, and put it back on the table. I didn't sign nor get angry. I simply looked up. Tiningnan ko si Slater sa mata and asked with absolute calm, after I sign, ano mang balak ninyong gawin? Instantly, Slater frowned. He didn't like me asking as if I had control. Sumandal siya sa sofa at sumagot. Problema ko na yon. Ano bang pakialam mo? Tinitigan ko siya for a few seconds. Yung muka, yung mata, yung boses. I knew them so well I could imagine them with my eyes closed. Pero the man in front of me was no longer the husband I trusted. Isa na lang siyang sakim, atat, at kinakabahang lalaki dahil his prey was just one step away. Wala na akong idinagdag. Slowly I opened my bag and took out my phone. My movements were so deliberate that everyone around me was perplexed. Chris looked at me, slightly frowning. Tumaas ang boses ni Nanay Pinto. Anong bagong kalokohan naman yang binabalak mo? I didn't answer. I opened the folder I had prepared, turned the phone screen towards them, and turned the volume to the max. Isang second later, the audio of the video echoed in the silent living room. Sa screen, it showed my living room on Noche Buena. Slater, sitting on the sofa with his arm around Chris's shoulders, and then his voice, the voice I had heard over and over during the last 2 days. Mula ngayon, bahay mo na ito. Don't be scared. Walang gumalaw. Walang nagsalita. I played the second video. This time it was my mother-in-law spreading the papers on the table with her impatient voice. Kailangang mabilis ito. Bago mag-ika, 27. Pak bumalik siya, sira ang lahat. Then Chris's voice. What if magforge tayo ing special power of attorney, SPA? And immediately after, Slater's icy voice. Hindi na kailangan. Ipa-pressure natin siyang pumirma for a waiver later. By then, wala na siyang matitira. Bawat salita exploded in the crowded living room like a slap to the faces of everyone present. Nakatinginan ang matito at tita in shock. Isa, who was about to sip his coffee, froze with his hand in the air. Another opened his mouth and closed it again with his eyes glued to my phone. In disbelief, ang katahimakan was so dense you could hear the hum of the ceiling fan. Nawalan ang kulay ang mukha ni Slater. Si Chris, who just moments ago looked triumphant, was pale. Her hands, resting on her knees, twitched. At si Nanay Pinti, who was lecturing me minutes ago, was paralyzed behind the sofa. Moving her lips without being able to articulate a word, I turned off the screen. The living room was still silent. I left the phone on the table, looked up, and stared at Slater. My voice wasn't loud, pero bawat salita fell with a cold, decisive clarity. Hindi ako pumunta rito para pumirma. Nandito ako para makita ang lahat ang totoong nga mukha niyo. My words had just echoed when the living room still seemed to hold its breath. Ni isang ubo, ni isang sigh, just looks darting back and forth among Slater, Chris, Nanay Pinti, and me. That silence was the most terrifying, because it wasn't shyness, kundi the shock of an audience that just saw the curtain fall, revealing the rot they previously thought was just a rumor. Pero Slater wasn't the type to sit idly by. He was paralyzed for only a few seconds and then jumped up, face red and eyes bloodshot. Bigla siyang sumugod patawid sa table towards me. If I were the Camille from before, I would have shrunk in fear, pero at that moment I was prepared for the worst. As soon as I saw him trying to snatch my phone, umiwas ako, moved the chair, and his hand missed, hitting the edge of the table and making the coffee cups clink. Sumigaw siya with a broken voice, gawa-gawa mo lang yan. In-edit mo lang yan. Tumayo ako. Holding the phone with one hand and leaning on the back of the chair, I looked at him up and down, observing how his aggressiveness started to show the panic he felt inside. Kung ganon, pakinggan natin ng mas malinaw ito. Without waiting for him to say anything, I played another audio recording. A slight static preceded Slater's voice, which resonated with brutal clarity in the living room. Kailangan natin siyang palayasin bago magpasko o hindi natin magagawa ang nga papeles. I didn't need to say another word. That single sentence was enough. The living room erupted in a collective murmur. Isang tita who was sitting near the window stood up abruptly, face distraught. She looked at Slater, and then at my mother-in-law and exclaimed with a high-pitched voice from the shock, Dios ko, paano kayo nagaroon ang ganyang klaseng anak? Her words were the spark that lit the fuse. The others started talking among themselves. Some shook their heads, others frowned, others whispered rapidly. The looks that previously judged me had now turned. Wala nang nakakakita sa akin as the woman making a scandal. They looked at Slater, Chris, and Nanay Pinti with a mix of surprise and repulsion. Narealized ni Nanay Pinti that the situation had flipped. She could no longer maintain her haughty attitude. In an instant, her tone of voice changed completely. Adopting that fake sweetness I knew so well, she stepped forward a bit and looked at me with eyes trying to seem kind. Camille, anak, Ang maganitong bagay ay pinag-usapan ng private. Wag kang gumawa ng eskandalo. Hearing her provoked a bitter laugh in me. A few days ago she was kicking me out of my room while I was delirious with fever. And now, in front of the family, she brings up privacy. Tiningnan ko siya, in the eyes without raising my voice, but with a clarity everyone could hear. Her face, trying to seem conciliatory, twitched. Pero Chris was different. She didn't have the same layer of hypocrisy as my mother-in-law. Cornered, she lost her temper. Tumalon siya patayo at dinuro ako. With her face distorted by rage and humiliation, her voice became a high-pitched scream. Isa ka lang namang pabigat na walang kwenta. Para saan pa ang bahay na to sayo? The living room fell silent again. Nobody expected that the woman who until now played the victim role would reveal her true nature so blatantly. Tiningnan ko siya. I watched how her makeup smudged at the corners of her eyes from anger and smiled with disdain. Oh! Baka napabigat ako, pero ang titulong bahay ay nakapanggalan sa akin. Having said that, I stopped looking at her. The lower someone falls, the less attention they deserve. Binuksan ko ang bag ko and took out the folder I prepared the night before, full of printouts, screenshots and copies of the evidence. I dropped it on the table. The sound of paper against wood was dry and definitive. I tinulak ko yung folder forward. I looked at Slater and with a voice still calm, but so cold that even I was surprised, I said, "At ito ang complaint affidavit na inihanda ko. Kung hindi sapat ang araw na ito diretso to sa piskalya." This time not only Slater turned pale. Nanay Pinti stumbled and held onto a chair. And Chris stepped half a pace back, looking at Slater as if expecting him to save her. Pero he no longer had that arrogance from earlier. Nanigas siya roon, hands resting on the table and neck tense, but unable to articulate a word. I knew he was calculating if I was bluffing, if I'd dare go that far. If, among all those relatives who now looked at him with contempt, he had any way out. And I, standing in the middle of that living room, for the first time in almost 10 years, didn't feel inferior to anyone. Itinapon nila ako like old trash. They tried to force me to give up everything. They spread rumors to destroy me, pero at that moment I knew the balance had shifted. Hindi na sila nakatungtong sa akin. And this was just the beginning of their downfall. Saktong-sakto pagkatapos kong magsalita, the sound of a car braking in the street was heard. Shortly after, the gate opened and firm footsteps echoed in the yard. A familiar figure appeared in the doorway. It was Don Roding. Pumasok siya sa sala and the atmosphere completely changed. In Slater's family, Don Roding was a man of few words, but when he spoke, everyone listened. Without beating around the bush, naglakad siya to the center of the living room. His gaze went from me to Slater and stopped at the papers on the table. Then, with a deep and clear voice, he asked, "Sino ang may-ari ang bahay na ito?" The living room fell silent. Nanay Pinti tried to speak, pero I stepped forward and answered calmly. "Ako po." Don Roding nodded and turned to Slater. His face didn't show anger, but a calm that was even more intimidating. Tiningnan niya ang pamangkin niya and asked him word by word. "Alam mo ba kung sino ang magumagulang niya?" Slater, bewildered, stammered. "Mga-ordinaryong tao po." Bago pa man siya matapos, Don Roding slammed his hand on the table. The bang made the coffee cups tremble. His voice rose, loaded with contempt. "Maordinaryong tao na nag-iwan sa kanyang ganitong kalaking bahay. Ang lupang ito ay kasama sa Commercial Development Zoning City Hall since last year. Ang value nito ay nagmultipli na. Akala mo ba pwede mo siyang paglaruan dahil wala kang alam? Walang utak, magasakim." Narinig ko ang magasalita niya and felt a chill. Totoo yon, I knew for months that the area was going to be redeveloped, but I never told Slater or his mother knowing their greed. And now that silence became their ruin. Slater looked at Don Roding and then at me with an expression that went from panic to total disbelief. Nanay Pinti sank into the sofa as if her skeleton was removed. Don Roding wasn't finished. He pointed at the papers on the table and said with a voice of steel, "Samga kalokohang ito, hindi lang bahay ang pwede mong mawala, pwede mo ring mawala ang kalayaan mo. Akala mo ba by deceiving kami at all ends? Hindi lahating kumikinang ay ginto." I knew it was my moment to add the final blow. Lumapit ako sa table, looked at Slater and my mother-in-law, and said softly, but with devastating clarity, "At for your information, dineposito ko ang lahat in original documents sa safety deposit box in Banco Bago pa Pasko." The living room erupted again in murmurs. "Sa banco?" asked an aunt. "So, bureau photocopy lang ang gato?" I didn't answer. I just looked at Slater so he'd understand that everything they had been planning was based on simple copies with no value. The color of Slater's face went from white to green. Ang lalaking who moments ago waited for my signature like a king was now the one trembling. Bakit hindi mo sinabi?" he babbled. Tiningnan ko siya and felt more pity than anger. "Para mas mapilano niyong kabit mo nang mas maigi." The phrase caused a collective gasp in the room. The contempt on the faces of the relatives was evident. Nanay Pinti, as if waking up from a nightmare, tried to save herself. "Camille, wala akong alam tungkol dito." Tiningnan ko siya. Ang babaeng tinawag akong malas, ang babaeng nakpalayas sa akin. Now she declared herself ignorant, pero it was too late because at that moment I knew the final thrust had been dealt. And this time not only Slater, but his whole family had started to feel real fear. The fear that had just appeared on their faces hadn't dissipated when Slater stood up again. Pero this time there was no trace of the previous aggressiveness. It was the uncontrolled reaction of someone who realizes that the prize he thought he had in his hands was never his. He rested his hands on the table with a tense neck and shouted, "Asawa mo ko, may karapatan ako sa conjugal properties natin." Dati, his shout would have made me tremble, pero ngayon hindi na. I looked at him calmly and answered firmly, "Wala kang anumang karapatan sa parafanal property ko." My response, along with a nod of approval from Don Roding, provoked murmurs of disapproval among the relatives. "Grabe ang taong tu, napakasakim," commented an aunt aloud. Just then, an uncle who had remained silent asked, "At ano yung toto na niloloko mo raw si Slater, Camille?" I didn't answer with words. I played another recording. Chris's voice resonated clearly. "Pag pumirma siya, palayasin na natin siya agad." No more explanations were needed. If I were the guilty one, bakit kailangan pa nilang maghintay na pumirma ako to kick me out? The gazes locked onto Chris, pale, starting to stammer. "Ako. Nagbibiro lang ako." "Ang tindi namang biro niyan," replied a cousin. "Ang palayasin ang isang tao sa sariling bahay." Chris, cornered, was left speechless. Nanay Pinti, genuinely trembling, tried one last move. "Camille, anak, nakameli ako." Tiningnan ko siya. Ang babaeng nanakot sa akin for years now showed herself weak, but her repentance arrived too late. I answered her without a pinch of emotion. "Ang magapagkakamali ay may kapalit." Maybe seeing that I wouldn't yield, Slater did something that left everyone breathless. Naglakad siya towards me and suddenly knelt. The thud of his knees against the floor echoed in the room. He took my hand and with a broken voice pleaded, "Camille, nagkamali ako. Bumalik ka na please." Anyone would have thought it was an act of desperate love, pero looking into his eyes, I didn't see repentance. I saw panic. Panic of losing the house, of losing his golden opportunity. Matigas kong binawi ang kamay ko. "Hindi ka lumuluhod para sa akin," I told him with a coldness that froze the blood. "Lumuluhod ka para sa bahay na to." And with that phrase, I knew that not only he, but everyone in that room had finally seen his true face. Slater's hand, still in the air, fell lifelessly. He remained kneeling, pero tapos na ang palabas niya. His face was a blank canvas, a mix of defeat and desperation, pero I knew that a public humiliation wasn't enough. If I left now, they'd find a way to twist the story. Kailangan ko tong tuldukan. Binuksan ko ang bag ko one last time, and took out another thicker folder. It wasn't messages or copies, it was the filati. Libayan had prepared a formal draft complaint for attempted estafa and economic abuse, RA 9262. I left it on the table, right in front of him. The sound of the paper was a final slam door to his farce. I said with a slow and clear voice, "Ito ang complaint para sa attempted estafa at VAWC." The living room ran out of air. If the videos scandalized them, the word complaint and VAWC terrified them. This was no longer a family drama. This was the law. Slater lifted his head, pale as a ghost. Hindi mo magagawa yan, he whispered. I felt a mix of pity and contempt. Talagang inisip niya that I wouldn't dare. Tinitigan ko siya. Tingin mo ba may mawawala pa sa akin? Just at that moment, firm footsteps were heard at the entrance. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Pumasok si Ati, Libayan with his leather briefcase and a professional calm that commanded respect. Behind him, an assistant. He greeted Don Roding and the elders and stood beside me. Binuksan niya ang briefcase niya, took out a document with his law firm seal, and said clearly, Ako po ang legal representative ni Mrs. Camille. Ang lahat na kalap na ebidensya ngayon ay sapat na to initiate a criminal and civil case kung magkakaroon in any attempt of coercion, threats, or unauthorized taking of her properties. The atmosphere became unbreathable. Nanay Pinti stumbled. Slater collapsed onto his knees, and Chris, the one who until now stayed by his side, started to back away slowly, stealthily, like a snake looking for an exit, moving away until almost reaching the door. Her face was a poem of panic. Finally, she whispered almost inaudibly, Wala akong kinalaman diyan. Slater turned around in disbelief. The man who had destroyed his marriage for her, now saw her abandon him. Iwan mo ko? He asked with a broken voice. The question was pathetic. And Chris, without a hint of hesitation, answered him with a coldness that cut the air. Wala ka nang kahit anong kailangan ko. A gasp of disgust swept through the room. Slater just stared at the woman leaving, unable to understand how everything crumbled so fast. Pero I understood. Their relationship was never love. It was a pact of interests. When the interest disappears, the pact is broken. Watching them destroy each other, I didn't feel joy, just a brutal clarity. And I knew that the coup de grace had been delivered. Walang nagsalita pa after Chris left. The living room, which always bustled with life in Christmas, was in a sepulchral silence. Slater was still kneeling, a pathetic and defeated figure. Nanay Pinti cried silently, pero nobody approached to console her anymore. I gestured to Ati. Libayan. He took out another document from his briefcase and put it on the table. It was the annulment papers I'll be filing. Kinuha ko ang ballpen. For an instant, my hand stopped, not out of doubt, but because of the weight of memories. All the years of enduring, waiting, believing that my sacrifice would save my family. Pero my patience didn't save anything. It only taught them that they could hurt me without consequences. Pumirma ako. My stroke was firm, decisive. When I put the pen down, I heard sighs of relief around me. Nobody tried to stop me. Nanay Pinti, between tears, pleaded, Camille, bigyan mo ako ng isa pang chance. Nagkamali ako. Tiningnan ko siya for the first time without fear or submission. May mga bagay, ma, na kapag nasira na, hindi na pwedeng ayusin, I told her softly. Pwede kayong magsimula ulit, ako rin. She was left speechless. I didn't look at Slater again. Wala nang dapat tingnan. Tumalikod ako and walked towards the door. Every step was firm, light. I was no longer dragging the weight of the humiliation from the 23rd. That time I left feeling abandoned. Now I was leaving by my own choice. Pagbukas ko ang pinto, the sunlight flooded my face. Sa labas, naghihintay si Mama. She didn't say anything, simply approached and took my hand. Her simple gesture was all the home I needed. Umuwi na tayo, anak, she said. And for the first time in many years, ngumiti ako. Isang totoong ngiti. Malaya. Opo, ma, sagot ko. Umuwi na tayo. We walked together, walking away. Behind me, the house and its inhabitants remained, pero they were no longer part of my life. Not because I had forgotten or forgiven everything, kundi dahil pinili ko nang bumito. And letting go is not a weakness. It's understanding that there are burdens that, if you keep carrying them, will only sink you. The fresh morning air filled my lungs and I felt an immense peace, like the calm after the storm, settling in my chest. I didn't know what the future held for me, pero I knew one thing. I would never again live the life I had before. And that was enough.